Welcome to the first Stonedowl Talks. We're still probably gonna be working out some kinks here. I thought I might do a multi-camera setup, but I feel like this camera is objectively worse in several ways than this camera, and I have no idea what it looks like because I didn't bother to check because it's bad. But look at that cool wide angle. It adds a unique perspective. I wonder if the way I angled it made it so you could see all of my fallen soundproofing on that wall. If not, that'd be funny, because then people wouldn't know my soundproofing fell. I have some coffee. I have a brain full of knowledge, and today we are going to be talking about Bleed and Bleed 2. Smooth transition. I don't think the word bleed ever comes up in the game's script, but that's what they're called. They're also extremely underappreciated. I love these two games immensely. They are awesome. And that's it. That's the video. Bye. So for those uninitiated, Bleed and Bleed 2 are these 2D side-scrolling action games where you play as Rin, a girl who wants to be the greatest hero of all time in the first game, and decides to achieve that goal by killing all of the other greatest heroes of all time. You know, sort of kill the king, become the king type. You know, smart stuff. And in Bleed 2, it is after the story of Bleed 1, which, no spoilers, I guess, at the moment, even though the stories are very much a smaller part of these games. I won't go into that yet, but in Bleed 2, there's essentially a new baddie, and you're like, I'm gonna fight that. Don't say I'm gonna hit that. That's not. So, the reason I love these games, and the reason I think they're underappreciated, all ties into the way they're designed being particular to something I have very much talked about and shown that I approve of on this channel, which is a game that takes a mechanic, explores it as much as it can, and then ends. You can see the mark of a really good game when its core mechanic is so engaging that they can spend the majority of their length just exploring that idea and putting it in these different scenarios, recontextualizing your abilities, and then after doing that for long enough, it stops, and the game isn't 100 hours. Bleed 1 and 2 both accomplish this goal in a different way. I'm gonna start by talking about Bleed 1 a bit, so we can keep things simple. So in Bleed 1, you're playing as Rin, and you want to become the greatest hero of all time by killing all the others. Fun stuff. You have 5 or 6, I don't remember. You have an amount of heroes to take out. And you, in-game, have 2 weapons you can switch between. You can buy more at the store, but I'm gonna be honest, I just find myself using the 2 cool pistol thingies. And on PC at least, which is where I recommend you play this if you can. I have some friends who have tried playing with the console controls, and I think you lose something with that, but I can't say for sure. But either way, you control your cursor with the mouse, and you can just point, and she shoots there. It's great. You see a target, aim at it, bam. There's no, 8-direction aiming. There's no direction aiming in Mega Man or something. Anything you see, you can aim your gun and fire at it. And the patterns from the enemies can get pretty hectic and chaotic, which is where the game's coolest, or I guess star feature comes in, which is the ability to slow down time. At any point, you can right click with your mouse and hold it down, and you are able to slow down the passage of time. You can slow down time to make it easier to dodge bullets or certain patterns and maneuver yourself. Or you can use the slowdown time to aim your shot. Of course, I mean, you can do both at once, but like, the way I see it is that when you're playing certain games and you're shooting at an object, sometimes you don't know if you're getting hits in the sense of, like, if an enemy is flying around the stage, right, and you're aiming at them and shooting them, there's no way every single shot you fire off hits. So one thing that's just really great in Bleed is you can slow down time while this enemy is sailing across the stage and make every bullet you shoot hit them, and it's massively satisfying. You have a certain amount of time slowage you can use, and if you don't let the meter hit 0, you can keep using it, right? So if you use up like a good chunk of your meter and stop, you could keep using it before it finishes recharging itself. It doesn't make it so like you use your time slowage for a bit and then you have to wait for it to get back to full to use it again. However, if you do let the meter deplete all the way, you do have to wait for it to fully recharge before you can start slowing down time again. And this kind of goes into what I was saying about this mechanic being really well integrated into the game and having a risk versus reward, because it pays to use it sparingly. The game keeps playing with this mechanic in terms of how it can be utilized in a level, whether it's the intro to the second level is a pretty good example of, like, you're going down this elevator and there are enemies from above who are just jumping down, shooting bullets at you, and meanwhile below you certain spikes on this elevator are lighting up and pillars will come out and they will hurt you. So there's a lot going on and it's early in the game, but if you slow down time you can figure out where you need to go on the elevator platform to not get burnt, and then, you know, play time normally and just use it sparingly, and that way you can get through the whole elevator shaft without running out. The game is constantly throwing new ways to use this time slowage at you, and the cool thing about the slowdown in Bleed and Bleed 2 is that you could probably beat Bleed without using slowdown at all if you were really determined, I think. I can't think of a time where it's specifically, like, required. But that's what makes it so cool, is that this time slowing skill is malleable, and it doesn't craft the playstyle of the game. It allows you to craft your playstyle with the game. The time stoppage mechanic doesn't make anything get hurt more. It just allows you to use it however you want to better dodge bullets and just platform. And the way Bleed 1 goes about utilizing this is a bit different from Bleed 2, because Bleed 1 has a lot of platforming in it in particular, which also gets me to another great thing with the time... I don't know what to call it. I keep calling it time stoppage, the time slowage, the time sludge. One of the really cool aspects to the platforming of the game and controlling Rin, which is why, again, I recommend playing this on PC, because the controlling game feel might not be the right word, but controlling her feels very exact. I mean, you can aim your gun anywhere on the you know, just as long as you can get your cursor there. And when she jumps, she doesn't just have like a double jump or a triple jump. She does these little wave dashes, and you can control the direction these go in any way you want. You can do 3 of them per jump, right? So you jump in the air, you can dash once, twice, 3 times, any direction you want. And again, slowing down time to angle these is great. And it's not like you just pick a direction and you're locked into it, right? So You take a jump and you're like, I'm gonna wave dash. It's not like you go, oh, I'm gonna go up and to the left, and Rin just kinda shoots in that direction and then falls down. No, she's moving in that direction. You can angle it back around, so you could you can do mid-air U-turns. You can do some crazy shit if you're using the slowdown to angle, you know, where you have her pointed and the 3 wave dashes effectively. It's really, it feels like when you're doing good at the game, it's this intricate dance. It's hard to describe, but it is so satisfying in a way that 2D action platformers have never been to me. And just to quickly add on top of this too, something that is really fun about this game as well is that you don't get game overs. There are a generous amount of checkpoints throughout all of the levels. So if you want to try some weird, risky ways to beat a boss and just kind of bang your head against it for a while, you can, because there isn't a game over or restarting the level at stake, which I feel is very cool, because it's not unfair. You still have to beat the boss and get through the levels and each section. Each segment of the game is very approachable because of this. To segue, the bosses. The main draw of Bleed, I would say, the levels are definitely challenging themselves, but the bosses are the type of thing where both Bleed 1 and 2 I've completed on the hardest difficulties. Bleed 2 has a special extra hard difficulty that we'll get into. But on the higher difficulties, you'll fight these bosses and they will give you a good whooping. But it's great. It is very fun, and again, never feels impossible, especially with your slowdown power. You're like, at any point, you can slow it down and break down what the enemy is doing. And that gives you a chance to learn the patterns without it being like, oh, I do need to die 50 times before I can win. Because I feel like that can happen a lot in certain games with, like, big, difficult bosses. It doesn't feel like that in this game, where, oh, dying a ton is required. There are some bosses in these games that didn't give me, like, trouble at all. And then some gave me a ton. Again, it kind of also goes with how your playstyle is and how good you get at using your ability to slow time without going overboard and not being able to use it for a bit. There have been so many moments when I'm playing Bleed 1 and 2 with these tense boss battles where I just barely win, and like you're down to 1 hit left and you run out of time stoppage and you're like, oh god, what do I do? And it creates this really good, this is a hard, I guess, this is a bit abstract to describe, but it creates a good relationship with the game. You don't feel like the game is antagonizing you at all. Actually, one really fun thing is whenever you die, Rin talks to you, and they're very, like, she has some very fun flavor text in quotes. Some of them are encouraging, like, even a broken clock is right twice a day, and then there are some that are a bit more defeating. My favorite being, do you have an older brother who could play this part? When I think about Bleed, the first thing my brain jumps to is the bosses. The levels themselves are very fun, but there is a core difference with how the level sections of the game are designed when we're talking about Bleed 1 versus Bleed 2. When you're playing Bleed 1 and going through the levels, it was a lot less of, like, just gotta run and gun and slow down when I need, and more so, like, a good example is the dragon. You're in their stomach, and you're going down, like, you start the level by, like, going down through an apple, and there's this really tough platforming section. Every time I play the game, I get stumped on it for a bit, where essentially you just have a few seconds to squeeze your way through these, like, chunks of platforming. It's a really, like, tight set of good 5 or 6 platforming sections where you just have a few seconds that you can slow down. You have to really just angle Rin, get her through, and don't shoot those yellow ball things, because then a ton of them shoot out and you get hurt and it sucks. It's a difficult platforming section, but either way, that section, again, like, no combat, just making your way through platforming. And then later in the level, another one of the harder sometimes platforming sections is you have all these, like, goopy ball things that are coming down, and some of them have those yellow balls within them where you shoot them and a ton of blonde balls come out, and you sort of have to, like, keep shooting at them from where they're coming from, and then at the perfect time wait for the stars to align and use your slowdown to sort of, like, angle yourself through while also shooting the balls to make sure you don't get killed. When Bleed 2 was coming out, my big fear was that Bleed 1 did this thing where it perfectly explored its mechanic and then ended, as I had said. So when Bleed 2 was coming out, I was nervous of, like, well, what do you do? What do you do when you've kind of already explored how to make platforming sections with the time slowdown? So Bleed 2 was coming out, and I got it. It was a long time after it had come out, and I started it, and at first I was a little nervous because when I started the game, it was like, moving. There were more mini-boss encounters than ever. And also, the platforming sections were, they got interesting for sure. And they are good. But initially I was taken aback because the pacing of this game was completely different from Bleed 1. And the fact that between the bosses, there was no longer this kind of buffer of, like, these difficult platforming sections that were also, you know, you're not flying around like crazy. You're again lining up all these perfect shots and, like, trying to just casually go through and not die. Bleed 2 is like just a constant adrenaline rush. The game starts and you are just flying through. There are enemies everywhere. You just go. It seemed like the game design was being less thoughtful, if this makes sense. Less, like, designed around the mechanic of slowing down time. But what I came to realize, as I also, once I got to level 3, this is on my first run through, I was playing on just hard the first time, and then after the first 2 levels, I was like, I'm not having much trouble with this, and then I tilted it up to very hard, and that's right when, like, the game got real, if you will, because I feel like if I was playing on hard, I would have started having trouble on the 3rd level anyways. The thing about Bleed 2 that makes it really, really good, and really, really replayable, in a sense, is that it wasn't just about the gun anymore. They incorporated a weapon that I believe you can buy in Bleed 1, but it works a bit differently, because it wasn't designed as, like, a core mechanic of the game. I never bought this item in Bleed 1, so I can't talk much about it. But either way, when you start Bleed 2, your loadout is your guns and a katana. Every time you hit your button shoot, she also, like, smacks her sword up, right? So every time you click it, just does the sword. And if you hold the button, you know, she's shooting him. The sword can deflect bullets that are pink. And in a game such as Bleed, which is bullet hell side-scrolling action with time slowdown, this changes everything. Like, Bleed 2 added this mechanic, and all of a sudden the game, because of this new combat feature, the game as a whole became much more based around combat. It's just way more high octane than Bleed 1, because the developer, Ian Campbell, I believe, knows that the combat is the main draw of Bleed 2, especially now. We did the first game where you were able to explore the platforming and boss design mechanics of the time slowdown. Bleed 2 added the katana, and the developer rightfully realized, hey, I did the platforming thing before. I did pretty much every, like, platforming scenario you can do. Let's focus on just making a high-octane, shoot 'em up, awesome, awesome game. And that works. The level segments are awesome. This isn't to make it sound like they became mindless in any way. There's a really good one around level 4, I believe, where you're... and this is a segment I never die on, but I love it. You're like an anti-gravity, and you can just wave dash infinitely. It's so much fun. Also, the amount of boss encounters in the game as a whole has been cranked up. There are so many boss encounters in Bleed 2, and they are all amazing in their own different way, because they are volleying these yellow and pink bullets at you, and so now the risk versus reward of slowing down time has another risk versus reward element of trying to parry bullets, which parrying bullets with your sword can go one of three ways. You can fuck it up and take a hit. You can kind of fuck it up where you parry it back, but you also take damage, or you execute it perfectly and you just parry the bullet back. I love that so much, that there is an intricacy to the timing, and there's also a slight lenience of like, well, you hit the bullet back, but that was a close one, you're taking damage. The risk versus reward element that made Bleed so satisfying to play now has an entire other layer, which is why I would never say Bleed 2 had less thought behind it than Bleed 1. In fact, I think I prefer Bleed 2. Initially, I didn't think this, but every time I turn on Bleed 2, I just end up playing the whole game. It is great. I went to get some footage for this video of Bleed 2, and I was like, I'll play like a level or two tonight, whatever, and then I'll turn it off. And then I ended up just whole game, one shot. Like I was saying with Bleed 2, how it really ramps up around level 3. That's because you meet this cool sword dude with the cool hat, and he's there, and if you don't master your parrying and your time slowdown, like, he'll fuck you up, because you go to shoot him and he just deflects it. It's great. It is so great, because now you have to parry. And again, this game isn't a fan of just not letting you hit things. You can take out bosses in many, I don't want to say different ways, but it isn't that stereotypical, like, very rarely at least, it is almost never that phase set up for a boss. We're like, oh, you gotta stun them 3 times and you can only get this much damage, and there are several opportunities to damage them. This sword guy, this cool sword dude, just a really good boss. You can, while they're going at you, like while they're slicing in the air, you can hit them with your bullets. It's not just, oh, I need to wait for him to do the attack that I can parry. There are several ways to hurt them. It's just what works for your playstyle and what can you pull off with your time stop while also not running out, because, you know, when you're in an emergency, you're gonna need to slow down time and get out of the way. Great boss that foreshadows the several other great bosses in this game. The way the game is designed, the way you control Rin, they all play with that in such a way where there are a ton of different combinations of slowdown and parrying that you can use to hurt them or dodge them in a way that works for you. It's massively fun. Another reason Bleed 2 works so well, the new engine. I don't know if it's a new engine. I think it's a new engine. At the very least, the entire overhaul of the visuals and sound design. Ian Campbell composed the original game. I don't remember the name of the man who composed Bleed 2, or woman. Flash that up. But the soundtrack for Bleed 2 is killer. Bleed 1 had some cute little like chip tunes. They were all very much made in like the same sort of sound font. But they're fun. You know, they work for the game. The boss theme's pretty bumpin'. But Bleed 2, this composer just went all out. He brought in these screeching guitar solos. God, the final boss of Bleed 2 has just the coolest song. And this stuff isn't just, when it comes to a 2D platformer, this stuff isn't just like flash and pop. This stuff really influences the just sheer enjoyment of the game, because Bleed 1 and 2, again, are games I describe as very satisfying to play. So this visual overhaul of your bullets coming from like your original bullets in Bleed 1, just these straight white lines turning into these giant like bombastic blasts, it is cool. Like it's great. If people aren't super crazy about 2D action games, I feel like this is the first one I would tell people to be like, you'll be into this, because it gets rid of that like, if you're not good, you're just gonna get a game over, because all of the, again, generous checkpoints. It has multiple difficulty levels that you can pick, which are tailored to you. Personally, I love playing it on at least hard mode. Probably my favorite run through of Bleed 2 has been, I played it on a mode called Too Hard, which is a mode you can only unlock after you beat the game, and you get these set of, I think they're called like mutators, and it's just a list of like, oh, anti-gravity on, really small bullets, like all these weird, they're like mods within the game, and when you turn on mutators, you can't get like achievements or anything. They are very much meant to fuck with the game, and there's one called Too Hard mode. It lists it as making the game nonsensically hard. I played through that mode, and I had a really good time. I died a ton, I spent hours on some bosses, but it was really, really fun. And again, I never felt like I couldn't do it. And that mode's supposed to be bullshit, and it still felt like, no, this is approachable. When you're playing Bleed, there's this sort of feeling you get, where you just kind of sync up with the game. You don't feel limited by your control set. It is very much like you have an idea for a move and you're just kind of pulling it off. The way you have to manage not just your life bar, but your time slowdown is so good in Bleed 1, and Bleed 2's focus on action and just boss battles in general really elevates that feeling of satisfaction you get from pulling off something correctly. But Bleed 2 is not just like Bleed 1 again, and I think that's what makes it really good. There's a new core gameplay mechanic that makes it feel very distinct from the first game. And that's not a bad thing at all. Once I understood what Ian Campbell and the devs were doing, I was like, I'm in for this. The way I'd sort of contrast them is that, like, Bleed 1 is a very, again, a very thoughtful game that has this new mechanic that the developers came up with for slowing down time, and they were very excited about that. And so they explored it thoroughly, and it was a great game. And Bleed 2 is like, let's make this insane, crazy carnival ride with these powers. Like, let's just go all out, make something really, really adrenaline pumping, and it's great. It's good for it. Like, it is a super fun game that I cannot recommend enough. Next time I think I'll bring more notes, because that was very difficult. Thank you for watching this video. My advice for you is to go buy Bleed 1 and 2 on Steam. They're both pretty not that expensive, and when they go on sale, they're extremely inexpensive. I think you can buy both of them for like $5 total, or somewhere around there. It's very cheap. And they are unsung 2D action platforming classics with a game feel that is all their own, very unique and very smooth. Good, smooth, unique gameplay that is, it'll get your heart going, but also won't make you regret living. And that was my Stonedowl Talks on Bleed 1 and Bleed 2, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I think that's what this was. Hopefully you liked it. Hopefully it was good. If it's bad, I guess I just won't do the show then. Yeah. Anyways, bye.